What is up, guys? Welcome back to day 3, round 5 of His Majesty Mohammed VI International Chess Tournament in Morocco, Casablanca. My name is Titus Tremavicius, and I'm a chess grandmaster. I'm doing a recap of this event because A, I played the former world number 2 player in this event, and B, this was one of my best tournaments ever, and I want to share my experiences and games with you from my time in Casablanca. So in round 4, we got an unexpected gift. And we won with black a very sort of smooth game against Pankratov Pavel, a grandmaster from Russia. And in round 5, we finally managed to make it all the way up to board 1 and face off against none other than Mamedyarov Shakhriyar from Azerbaijan, 27-47, super grandmaster, former world number 2, by far the strongest player I've ever played in over-the-board chess. Not gonna lie, I was a little bit anxious going into the round. As he was on 4 out of 4, so he's swept away his competition so far. But I did have the white pieces in this game, and I was consulting my coach before the game, and he kind of was trying to encourage me a little bit, and also gave me this sort of nitpick of an idea where Mamedyarov is known for his attacking play style and his play with the white pieces, but he's not that well known for his play with the black pieces. And I kind of thought about that idea, and I kind of realized that, yeah, he might be onto something. I do remember him having some blistering attacks with the white pieces, but not so much with the black ones. So with that in mind, me having the color advantage here, I felt like was quite important. That just kind of pays the way to like the luck event, the luck factor in the event, where I have 3 whites in the first 5 games. Second round of the day, my opponent, after the game we talked, he said he's like not very used to playing 2 rounds in a day. Like hasn't played 2 rounds, he said, I believe in more than 15 years or something like that. Fatigue was definitely also, weighing on my opponent maybe a little bit. And whereas for me, I'm quite used to playing 2 rounds a day. So with all of those factors in mind, this wasn't as big of a mismatch as I initially thought. And I was expecting my opponent to play, some sort of a d5 opening. Earlier in the event, I think he played c5 on move 2, which is an interesting line. Looks a little bit dubious for black, and potentially is, but the refutation is not so simple to sort of make over the board. The current engines aren't exactly showing how to get a massive advantage for white, just like something slightly better maybe. But I wasn't sure what he was going to go for, and there weren't many games, honestly. Like when you go for this move order with knight f3 and move 2, there's definitely not as many games as, if I played c4 on move 2. So it's definitely handicapping me a little bit, where I can't prepare for my opponents maybe as much as I would like to. So my opponent decided to play knight f6, and I was just going to go for my usual setup with g3, sort of a delayed Catalan setup. And my opponent does go for the Catalan, and d takes c4, and honestly I was not really expecting it all that much, before the game I didn't even know what I was going to go for in this position. And over the board I like thought about it for a little bit, and I thought I didn't want to play my usual queen c2, namely for the main reason that my opponent might play b5, and there was one game of mine in the database in this position, and it's a very long theoretical line if you know it. If you don't know it, it's a very short theoretical line where you have to know some things. It's a modern approach to play with the black pieces, and I was kind of afraid of it over the board, because there was one game in the database of mine in the Catalan in this position, in this variation. After the game, my opponent said if I had played queen c2, he would have played b6, which again I hadn't checked in a while, and would have been also not so easy to play over the board during the game. The idea is basically that if you go knight e5, then queen d4, bishop e8, and queen e5, black has great compensation for the exchange, and the pawn on c4 isn't so easily attainable, because the bishop might come to a6 and collect the pawn on e2. So I'm kind of happy with what I chose over the board, which was queen a4, which is known as a more sort of dry and drawish approach. The main difference in here compared to the other b6 line is that after I take the exchange, I retreat with bishop on f3. My queen is slightly better placed, I would say, as it's not only attacking the pawn on c4, but also attacking the pawn on e7. And I briefly just looked at some, computer line after the game, which was like bishop a6, knight c3, g5, some really weird gameplay. And I would say that this is definitely playable for both sides, but the engine does give a slight advantage for white. Would have, managed to sort of go through the complications and find the best moves? Probably not. Would my opponent have managed? Probably not as well. So it would have been a messy game most likely, and the result could have been quite different from what happened in the game. But instead, my opponent plays the sort of main line with a6. And then we, kind of go to the, again, main line with bishop d2. And basically here, I had my sort of over-the-board idea was that if I'll play queen c1, maybe my opponent will play bishop b7. And, I'll just decide, like I decided that I would repeat here, second round of the day. My opponent's like 200 points higher rated. I felt like that was definitely a sensible approach. I remember, I think in this position, like 5 to 10 years ago, the main line used to be queen b3, maybe 10 to 15 years ago, actually. But nowadays, computers have worked it out that c5 gives an advantage for black in this position is already quite a bit better and very dangerous for white to play. I did play queen c1. My opponent kind of sank into a think for a bit. Besides bishop b7, I knew that there is a move such as c6. Basically, the idea is to, you got the bishop out, and now you can sort of consolidate, and the bishop can potentially even draw back to g6. And this bishop is always challenging this bishop on g2, so I can't, ever really easily hop in with knight e5. What would I've done during the game? I'm not sure. I've recently been looking at some very, again, dryish looking line with e3. But that's for another day. For now, let's focus on the game where my opponent decided to play b4. And I've never seen this move before. I didn't even know it existed. There was only a handful of games in this line from the black pieces. And the move makes some sense. Obviously, it prevents the knight from being developed to c3. But at the same time, it's a waste of time as you have, still undeveloped pieces, and you moved a knight's pawn for a second time in a row, basically. Well, not in a row, but a second time in a very short time span, and you didn't even attack a piece, so you didn't even gain a tempo. So you're definitely overextending a little bit as black. I wasn't sure what to do here. I thought my opponent had, potentially, again, quick ideas with knight bd7 and c5, which looked quite dangerous, but at the same time, looking back at it right now, I feel like, again, black is a little bit overextended, so I should have plenty of time to sort of consolidate and finish my own development. It feels a little bit bad to move the bishop second time, but I do play bishop g5, because now with the pawn on b4, bishop a5 was no longer an option. So I felt like my bishop is not doing anything and also restricting my knight's development, so I decided to play bishop g5, knight bd7, knight bd2, with basically winning a tempo, attacking the bishop on e4. And here during the game, I remember I was thinking that my opponent should play bishop d5, which I felt like was a more sensible approach, just basically keeping her pieces centralized, and potentially if I wanted to put my rook on d1, it would be always blocked with the bishop on d5, and e4 I can't play it right now, and it's not easily sort of preparable. It's not easy to prepare at all, and I felt like the bishop would be better centralized on d5, basically. My opponent decided to draw it back all the way to b7, which I thought was a slight inaccuracy, as potentially in some lines, maybe I can play, with knight e5, knight c6, and even block it if, let's say something else drops on d5 or e4. So I felt like bishop b7 was a bit accurate. I decided to proceed with my original plan of playing rook d1. And here I was considering a lot of moves for my opponent, but he, finally decides to play c5, which I thought was a very committal decision, because I have this discovery of knight e4. And keep in mind, like, these moves seem very simple, but during the game, I definitely was burning a lot of time and wasn't exactly sure if my approach was good at all, because I felt like my opponent had some options, again, bishop d5 specifically. And even here, I was for the longest time considering if my opponent can, sacrifice a queen with knight c4, which I thought was an interesting idea because all of his pieces are kind of very well developed and centralized, while my rook is still on a1. So I'm still lacking development a little bit. The bishop on g5 is also hanging, and it wasn't as clear to me during the game. I remember I was calculating that I would probably play knight d2 in this position. There were other moves as well that would keep the advantage for white, but I was kind of decided that I would play knight d2 if we got this position. Instead, my opponent plays queen b6, just gets the queen out of the way, which was under attack. And now I decided to take on f6, basically doubling my opponent's pawn structure, and that's why c5 was sort of a risky approach, because we basically got this lion by force. Like, there was nothing my opponent could have really done to prevent me from taking on f6. He decided to take with the pawn, which I think is the correct approach. And after bishop h6, rook fd8, queen f4, I was kind of getting a little bit optimistic, as I thought my position was very good, and it is very good. White has a substantial advantage here already, and it's not easy to play for black as well. Like, that's, it's an advantage based on the position, and also an advantage of how difficult the moves are to play for each side. And here after f5, I was getting a little bit low on time. I still had like about maybe half an hour, but I didn't see a concrete way to sort of increase my advantage and win on the spot. And I was considering this move g4, which is by far the best move in the position, and just creates and immediately creates threats and starts the onslaught of the opponent's king. And I basically couldn't find a move for my opponent, and I was like calculating some nonsense with knight e4, but after knight e5, like basically the threat on f2, which black had established, is no longer there, because the queen protects the pawn on f2. And basically, yeah, like there's nothing really my opponent can do besides knight e4. Like another move could be bishop f6, but I could then just trade, for example. If he takes with the rook, bishop g5 eliminates the dark square bishop, which was guarding the dark squares. And the position would be slowly collapsing for black. And if my opponent were to take with the queen, then I can just take a healthy pawn on f5, and e5, queen f5, just a pawn up. My opponent doesn't have anything to show for it. His king is also weak, so it's like a pawn plus compensation for advantage for white. And I can't really explain why I didn't play g4. I mean, I saw it, but at the same time, my calculation in some lines was definitely quite shady. So sometimes when you don't trust your calculation, you tend to lean towards a safer approach. And in most cases, I would say that's a completely fine approach. But in this case, I feel like when you're playing someone of this caliber, when you have a chance to sort of make your mark, in your own career and in the tournament as well, you should definitely try and look to do so. And I did see g4, and I don't know why I didn't play it, but mostly, yeah, probably just a lack of trust in my calculation, and just chickening out a little bit because I was somewhat low on time and decided to play a safer move, which was knight e5 basically. What knight e5 does is just starts some trades. White is still somewhat better, but the bulk of the advantage is definitely gone. My opponent decides to take f6, knight c4, again queen b5, queen c7. Again, I made this move after a decent amount of my time was gone, because it's a very committal move again. I wasn't sure if it's the best move, but my opponent, basically, I'm kind of trying to lean on the safer approach, but definitely, again, should be a bit more optimistic in my position and trust my calculation a little bit more. Queen b7, knight b7, and here I think is the moment actually I'm the most sort of upset about. G4 obviously was a great sort of chance to seize a large advantage. But in this position, I could play a very simple move, which makes a lot of sense when you look at it. And my position would still be significantly better because of all the weaknesses in my opponent's camp, because he pushed this pawn to b4 early in the game, right? The move was rook dc1. I'm sure there's other moves, but I like this move the best. Basically, the idea is that this rook on the d file, he cannot ever infiltrate because the d2 square is very heavily guarded. So its job on the d file is very limited, and its potential on the d file is very limited. And my idea is very, very simple. Let's say my opponent brings the king, I bring the bishop back, rook e8, knight b6, and I just take over the c file. And the c file is significantly more useful than the d file, because I actually have very, very juicy infiltration squares where my opponent's pieces could become weak in the short run, even like not even in the long run, right? So I definitely should have went for this position where I have basically all of the play. My opponent has none, and I'm definitely, I would say, probably the most frustrated about missing this opportunity. But again, just the modest approach of bishop e3. Kind of just wanting to clinch a good day, sort of, after winning in the morning round and playing a world caliber player in the second round with the white pieces. Just want to stay solid. And my opponent offered me a draw here as we reached the 30 move threshold, and I accepted, even though white is still slightly better. I guess because of the weakenings and the pawns being fixated on the dark squares, it really would make no sense to keep playing in this position after I spoiled, after I had many more sort of attractive options, and I chose not to play them. So what are my thoughts about the game? Well, I'm definitely looking back at it, kind of, what could have been a moment where g4 would have been a very concrete and very direct way to try and win the game. Rook dc1, just keeping the game going and pressing a world-class player. My opponent definitely didn't play his best game. I think he misplayed in the opening, and then in the middle game, I didn't really give him any chances to sort of shift the initiative because my moves were very, very, very simple. I think if he, one moment that he could have maybe played a bit more actively was bishop d5 against one move line. So it's not clear how the game would have changed after that. But basically, the idea is, again, you put a piece on the d file, and you stay sort of, you control more squares with the bishop on d5 than the bishop on b7. And this c5 breakthrough, very, very typical, very natural, but maybe was a little bit underprepared as well because, my pieces are just better prepared to handle the following breakthrough because of this knight d4 trick and basically forcing the double pawns on the king side and then weakening the king, and then having play against the king in the middle game. Nevertheless, still a great day. 1.5 out of 2. Drawing against the first seed with the white pieces is definitely not a bad result. So I'm currently on 4 out of 5. And thanks for watching. I'll see you in the recap for game number 6.